Thank you. Each year at the Ethical Society, we organize our programs around a theme. Our theme this year is exploring the human condition, and we have many fascinating and diverse programs scheduled. Our speaker today is our interim director, as well as clinical social worker, relationship coach, mediator, and author. Please join me in welcoming Amy Miller.
Good morning. There's no place to put this. I remembered to wear flats this time. If you recall, last time I had to take my shoes off mid-talk because my feet hurt. I learned my lesson. My name is Amy Miller, and my pronouns are she or they, and I'm the interim director of the Ethical Society. And also, my 7-year-old daughter told me I looked very professional today. So, this is for you. The plan to talk about compassion was in place prior to recent world events. And in thinking about how to frame today's talk, because I know so many people are feeling helpless and overwhelmed by the violence and despair in the global community, I thought we might appreciate a dive into what we can control. So let's talk about compassion within the spheres over which we have direct influence. And I'll maybe offer some things we can immediately take action on that will make the world a better place, and they'll make the Ethical Society a better place. A month ago or so, member Keith Roper, who was to give us opening words today, mentioned in the Friends of the Ethical Society Facebook group. How many of you are in that group? Oh, good. Well, if you're not and you're on Facebook, the group is called Friends of the Ethical Society of St. Louis, and a lot happens there. I post there. I try to give you a resource like every day if possible, so there's a lot going on there. But anyway, many of you saw this conversation. He wondered to what extent we were living the humanist definition of being motivated by compassion. According to the Humanist magazine, humanism is a rational philosophy informed by science, inspired by art, and motivated by compassion. He wrote, this is Keith writing, "I'm thinking now of other congregations who are motivated by a presumed history of God's love and his eternal presence and compassion and are very upfront about it. This is a big attraction for those of us who sense a lack of love in society or who feel alone. Folks are looking for a spiritual home, spiritual in quotes. And it's hard for some of us to feel at home if love and compassion are not more obvious." Since he was already scheduled to give opening words today, and I was already slated to be the speaker, it seemed appropriate to use his comments as a springboard for a broader conversation. Before continuing, I would like to say that I hope today of all days, when we learned that his mother has passed away, we greet Keith with active and intentional displays of love and compassion. In grief, above all, people need to feel supported and cared for. But even before the most recent event of his mother's passing, this comment from Keith really struck me at the time, and I've spent a lot of time since then thinking about this question. Are we leading with compassion? Do people feel loved here? Can we cultivate a more actively and outwardly compassionate community? I've personally experienced many folks here who lead with a deep well of interpersonal kindness and compassion, who have welcomed me enthusiastically, people who have earnestly checked in with me to see how I'm faring, who have encouraged me to keep doing what I'm doing. People who have apologized for harsh words or uncharitable interpretations, with whom I've resolved misunderstandings and ended meetings with hugs. There are many incredible people within this community with whom I have been steadily building healthy, reciprocal relationships with that I hope will last well beyond my tenure here. I feel well loved by many members. But, and you may not want to hear this, I've also been treated rather poorly by a few others, or at the very least, if I'm being as objective as possible, with what feels like missing empathy or opting for an uncharitable interpretation in the face of missing information. But I've heard from many members that leaders here are often subject to harsh criticism. So I say this not to chastise, but because I'm in a unique position where particularly harsh critiques might be expected, I personally couldn't say whether the society is broadly experienced by others as being motivated by compassion. I couldn't say whether, on average, people feel loved here. It is my understanding that there hasn't been much use of words like love. So it may not have ever occurred to you whether you personally feel loved at the Ethical Society of St. Louis. And you may be cringing inside right now, thinking, that is not what we do here. You can let me know how much you hate this in the platform survey. But I believe it is relevant and imperative for our continued growth to be intentional in creating a loving, welcoming, and compassionate community. When I asked one of my church-going friends whether they feel loved at their church, they said that's why they go. They feel loved by God, but also by their fellow congregants. I do not think loving community is solely the domain of congregational theists. I've since inquired and learned that, in fact, it's a mixed bag here. Those who responded to the question, so I posed the question in the group, and I got some emails and I got some Facebook messages. And I've also talked to many of you over the past few months, and people are having different experiences here. Many have received profound and meaningful compassionate support, but sadly, a few have felt judged. One person said she felt rejected. And at the time Keith posed the question in the Facebook group, I offered in response that I thought the addition of the ethical communication guidelines might help to affirm the intentional use of compassion by weaving it into the fabric of the community. And that I personally hoped that by modeling use of words like love and beloved community and caring, we might be able to collectively make the ways we care about each other a bit more obvious. I don't think the concept of grace, for example, is solely the domain of religious traditions either, although it has been used often to refer to the grace of God. If you look it up, there are a slew of dictionary definitions and uses. This is the one I like the most. Disposition to, or an act or instance of kindness, courtesy, or clemency. In the context of interpersonal dynamics, the act of offering grace is simply the willingness to forgive minor transgressions, to be generally accepting and loving, and to treat people with unconditional positive regard. Please note that this does not mean you will not disagree. It doesn't mean you won't critique or even have conflict. People are different, and in a community of smart, thoughtful, committed people, it is inevitable. It merely means that the ways in which you do everything reflects a commitment to honoring each other's dignity and worth. You all know I'm a crier and a hugger, and I use heart emojis in my emails. So I am what is sometimes pejoratively known as a touchy-feely person. And that is part of what the folks who are less kind to me here do not like. I lead with love and empathy, and I wear my heart on my sleeve, as it were, and I've received mixed results from this approach. My observation since I got here has been that this community is actually rather divided down an unseeable but clear difference. In a small group coffee date months ago, member Joe Corrigan, where are you at, Joe? There you are. Member Joe Corrigan gave me the words for this observation. He suggested the community is made up of those who are more head people and those who are more heart people, and suggested I do a whole platform on the heart and head dichotomy. So I do need to give him some credit, as well as Keith for the inspiration for today. So thank you to both, and I'm putting them together in a medley. Now, this is an imperfect binary, of course, but I've had this conversation many times in different ways with members, so I think it's probably accurate enough and familiar enough to work for the purposes of this conversation. I looked up different definitions of what we might generally mean with head and heart people and how their decision-making and behavior might compare and contrast. Here are some differences. Head people might appear more emotionally reserved or stoic. They tend to keep their emotions in check and may be perceived as less expressive in their feelings. This doesn't mean they don't have feelings, just that they are less likely to show them or act on them. They're pragmatic. They focus on practical solutions and may have a strong orientation towards efficiency and effectiveness. They are often goal-oriented and may prefer to keep emotions out of decision-making. They can be forceful in their opinions because they are not necessarily considering the way others might feel. They're merely providing information. Head people may be very uncomfortable with heart-centered language or overt displays of affection or vulnerability. They probably don't naturally use words in their everyday conversations like love and grace. Now, heart people, on the other hand, may tend to make decisions based on their emotions, feelings, and personal values. They're often highly attuned to the emotions and needs of other people and consider the impact of their decisions on the group. Because of this, they may keep their opinions to themselves when they aren't sure it will be received well, to disagree. They may be more likely to go along with things they personally don't like if the group decides it's best, which makes them appear more easygoing. They may be more conflict avoidant than our head people. Heart people are typically more expressive in their emotions and might be more comfortable sharing their feelings with others than head people. Heart people might be perceived as warm, caring, and compassionate when positively evaluated, or touchy-feely, wishy-washy, and even irrational when negatively evaluated. Head decisions are likely to be based on careful analysis. Facts, data, and may tend to be less emotionally influenced. Head people may be perceived as logical, rational, and reasonable when evaluated positively, or cold, calculated, and even mean when evaluated negatively. Idealism tends to be more the domain of heart people, which I kind of agree with, but I would say in the case of our head versus heart dichotomy, due to the nature of our reasons for gathering together, both types of people focus on values, ethics, and moral principles in their decision-making. I think all of us in this room are motivated by a desire to do what is right, just, and fair. But we may all arrive at what that means in different ways. I'm not sure which is better. I think both head and heart have their time and place to shine. We need both in a community, but we also have to honor both and do our best to ensure that everyone is nourished equally. So based on this imperfect binary, and with the agreement that everybody does both at times, and both are perfectly acceptable and valid ways to be, and you will not be held to this in the future, when you hear these, let's take an informal poll of the room. When you hear these terms, would you be more likely to describe yourself as a head person? Raise your hand if you're a head person. And if you are a heart person. Everybody does both. If you have to pick one. I know it's a forced choice. If you have to pick one, do you want to do it again for those of you who were like in between? Raise your hand if you would consider yourself, by best definition, a head person. And a heart person. Okay, and those of you who just refused to categorize yourself, raise your hand. Okay, fair. There's an in-between space. We all do both. I think most of us tend to lean one way or the other in our preferences and our behaviors, but I accept this. So when Keith posed this question about compassion and love and acceptance, I began to wonder whether compassion is something that can be taught, or more accurately, whether we can practice behaviors that allow others to experience our compassion more. Many of our head people practice compassion in less overt ways, like donation to causes and quiet volunteerism, which is important and generous, and doesn't always translate interpersonally into warmth, care, and visible compassion. So for those who tend to be more cerebral and less outward with their emotions, can you learn to behave in ways that allow others to experience compassion from you? Can we cultivate compassion on purpose? Compassion literally means to suffer together. Among emotion researchers, it is broadly defined as the feeling that arises when you are confronted with another's suffering and feel motivated to relieve that suffering. It's like a step beyond empathy. In other words, when we feel intrinsically connected to others and actively desire to make their lives better, to relieve their suffering, but also to view them charitably and be kind to them. Everyone is going through something, and I think most people are doing the best they can. When I am hurt or frustrated by something someone is doing, I often use the words, if I look at this person's behavior through the lens of compassion, here is what I see. And many of you have heard me People who I talk to a lot have heard me use this to try to make sense of things. It helps me to not default. And I try to see what motivates, I lost my place. Try to see what motivates it or what pain they are trying to avoid through the behavior I don't like or which harms me. It helps me not default to being angry or to write someone off. It allows me some space to consider the most charitable interpretation. I learned this language, the lens of compassion, from shame researcher Dr. Brené Brown. You guys familiar with her? Brené Brown defines compassion as the ability and willingness to empathize without judgment and to face pain. An evolutionary perspective on compassion can be traced to Darwin in 1871, who stated, "Those communities which included the greatest number of the most sympathetic members would flourish best and rear the greatest number of offspring." We are not as a community trying to rear offspring, but we are trying to flourish, and we want our meerkat mob, for those of you who are here to talk about meerkats, our meerkat mob to continue to grow and thrive. And to that end, we are trying to expand our reach into the broader human family. We collectively want to show that we here are a welcoming home for humanists, and indeed for anyone who wants to be part of a community that gathers together to learn and explore life without reference to the supernatural. I remember early on in my time here, maybe at the pledge luncheon, a lively conversation arose at the table I was seated at about the temperaments that predominated the society. The conversation was about how one thing that has historically been a struggle, like historically meaning like forever, here, is creating a warm and welcoming environment. This is additionally challenging because we have many members who are simply uncomfortable initiating conversation or feel awkward approaching strangers. I feel awkward approaching strangers, guys. I do it anyway because it's really super important. But one longtime member, I think it was Dan Overman, said, "It's so much better now." And I wondered aloud what has changed, and he said, "Oh, it was part of a strategic plan." And we had a good laugh, as you might expect. You had to create a strategic plan to decide to be more welcoming. It's a very head thing, right? So this suggests a lot of head people here, specifically suggesting that some of the people in this community just may not default to externalizing warmth. This is not to say that people are not kind or do not care, but if a preponderance of folks are disinclined to be actively welcoming, then it would make sense that for people who are attuned for or looking specifically for that, coming here might not feel particularly outwardly compassionate. Part of what makes it hard to objectively measure something as nebulous as the feel of a community is that each of us is differently motivated and we evaluate subjectively. Each of us needs different things. We all have different backgrounds that can affect what amount of compassion we naturally feel towards others or expect or desire to feel from others towards us. The shift that makes the most sense to have the greatest overall impact is to default to offering warmth and compassion to everyone, just in case they are someone who is looking for that. And expecting that everyone, to the best of their ability, will offer it in return. Holding one another to a standard of kindness and compassion will have a net positive impact on the community and its ability to flourish. We cannot radically change what is happening in the world, but we can change what happens in our tiny corners of it. We can change what happens in our communities. I've been here for almost a year, and I strongly suggest we redouble our efforts on being warmer and more welcoming to all who enter our space, so that everyone might feel loved. Loved in the simple human way of the light in me sees the light in you and wants to be part of the community. Something as simple as good morning and eye contact when you pass someone you don't recognize in the hallway goes a long way. I've been reading a lot about the science of compassion and whether or not it is actually a thing that can be taught, and the research suggests it is an innate human quality. Folks with a lot of trauma in their childhood seem to go one of two extremes. They are either extremely high in empathy and compassion because of their lived experience, or they significantly lack compassion and empathy because those early traumatic experiences blunted their capacity. In those latter cases, what can be taught are the behaviors that demonstrate compassion, even if they do not actually feel it in their bodies. I say that to say anybody can do this. But if we are assuming most of us have average amounts of compassion available to us, then the science suggests that all of us, regardless of our background, family of origin, or trauma history, can learn interpersonal behaviors that demonstrate compassion. So again, I think broadly, the culture of the Ethical Society of St. Louis has historically aligned with the head, with a lot of academic study, science, and that which can be measured. But the heart people are here too, as you saw. And they've been biding their time because they like all that stuff also. But I know that the heart people have been feeling more nourished and supported of late because they are the ones giving me positive feedback and an affirmation about the work I'm doing here. They often are the ones saying, "Thank you for knowing my name." I've heard that a lot. Thank you for knowing my name. Thank you for listening to me. And my favorite, which I will keep in my sunshine folder, which Trish told me to keep a sunshine folder of all the good things. One person said, "Since you arrived, I feel a sense of belonging here that I've never felt before." Which means that it's possible the head people have been feeling neglected since I've been here, because I clearly emphasize heart skills like communication, apology and repair, boundaries, healthy relationships, healthy conflict, and so on. Those things are hardly an exact science. They're often individual and subjective and not always measurable. But I would argue that they are deeply relevant to the health and happiness of a community and how the relationships among people play out. To be clear, the head versus heart dilemma is not unique to us. It reflects a common human conflict that often arises when making decisions, especially those that involve personal values, relationships, and ethical considerations. In other words, when trying to find consensus in a community like ours, even on something as innocuous as the expression of compassion, it's going to be challenging unless we learn to define and practice compassion in a shared way that feels authentic and comfortable to everyone. So one member, definitely a head person who I adore, asked if I could offer some practical takeaways on how to practice compassion. She said, "What can we do to show that we care and are being compassionate?" Hold, please. If you were in forum, you know I've talked a lot today already. Okay. The things I can offer by way of tips and tools, both collected and created, for cultivating compassion are as follows. Much of it we are already doing really well. This is not a critique at all. This is an affirmation of what we are doing well and what we can continue to do. Also, because I'm going to be listing things, I can send these out in the weekly email since they will be hard to remember. Just listen for the ones for now that feel doable to you personally. Number one, we can model compassionate behavior. Those of us who are heart people, who maybe naturally lead with warmth and outward kindness, can set an example. Show empathy, kindness, and understanding in your daily life. If you are practicing this regularly, people will feel the difference and respond to it. Also, all of these are for the broader world, not just here. These are things you can practice in your life. Number two, foster empathy on purpose. Empathy is the foundation of compassion. We are consistently practicing empathy when we have forums, workshops, and ongoing peer support groups where folks are encouraged to share, have open conversations, and tell their stories. After forum today, you may have ideas about groups you could start yourself that will foster this. Come talk to me about it. Number three, share yourself with others in the community. Storytelling is a profound tool of connection. So many of you have such complex, interesting, and sometimes tragic stories. I was sad when one member I really liked told me they don't share their whole story with many people here for fear of judgment. Personally, I feel so much empathy for each of you when we get together and we talk about our challenges. I imagine you feel this too. Let's do it more on purpose. Number four, and this is very important. If you get nothing else from this, take this one. Be intentional about reaching out to each other. Sometimes people get busy and forget to check on their friends. In order to get better about doing this, you may have to set reminders on your phone. Like, hey Siri, remind me tomorrow to text Jennifer about her doctor's results. I had to do that because my friend had a biopsy. And I didn't want to forget to reach out to her. So my phone gave me a reminder. It does not devalue the act to have to be reminded. We have so much other stuff going on. When you know that a member here is going through something, has lost someone, or has a surgery coming up, try to remember to reach out and send that person some care and concern, regardless of whether you have a close relationship with them or not. Everyone's contact information is in the member directory. There's no reason that you can't get a hold of someone and say, I'm sorry for your loss, or I hope your surgery goes well, or I am thinking of you. This is available in the office. There is actually a mailbox slot that says member directories. Nancy prints these regularly so that those of you who are not website people can get your hard copy. It has all the members' email addresses. Don't call people unless you're like that kind of, you know you're that kind of friends. Maybe it's just me. Don't call me. Let me just speak for myself. Text or email is best. Or we can meet in person. It's not that I don't want to talk to you. The caring team does a lot. You guys know about the caring team? By the way, the caring team could use more members. So if you're someone who's interested, Gina Gardner is currently the person to speak to. But the caring team does a lot. But they can't possibly know everything that goes on with everyone. And of course, many of you do this already, but if you are not in the habit of it, this would be one practical and actionable, you hear that? These are for my head people. Practical and actionable ways to practice compassion. Another thing that's really important is practicing self-compassion. Self-compassion was defined by Kristen Neff, and a guy named Chris Germer was also on the research team for this. But it means being open to and moved by one's own suffering. Self-compassion is associated overwhelmingly with positive qualities. Self-compassionate people are happier, more forgiving of others, and easier to get along with. A key component of self-compassion is the absence of self-criticism, which is known to be an early predictor of anxiety and depression. Self-compassionate people tend to recognize that imperfection and failure are often unavoidable, and so are more likely to be kind to themselves when confronted with negative experiences. If you are someone who has a negative or critical self-talk loop, which I will not make you raise your hands, but I guess probably some of you do, think about whether you would ever say those mean things you say to yourself to a beloved friend. I saw an infographic once about self-talk that I will never forget. And it just said, it's hard to be happy when someone's being mean to you all the time. So if this is you, and you're being mean to yourself all the time, let's work on being more compassionate to yourself and treating yourself how you would treat a beloved friend. It will benefit all of us. Number 7. Create and participate in volunteer and service opportunities. And we have ample opportunities for this. Giving to and helping others can help foster compassion and a sense of purpose. Now is a good opportunity to remind you to sign up for our Thanksgiving Day of Service on November 26th, which is being generously organized by our lovely member, Crystal White. She sent out a sign-up sheet. Well, it wasn't a sheet, it was a sign-up link in the weekly email. Raise your hand if you have not seen the sign-up for volunteering on the 26th. Okay, a few of you have not seen it. We can find it for you. You can type in your name, pick a thing you want to work on, and show up on the 26th, and we can work together. I'm going to be doing the emergency contraception kits, which I'm really excited about. If you want to be on my team, sign up for that. Okay, number 8, promote radical inclusion and perspective taking. This is what I was talking about in my note last week about diversity and anti-racism work. The most humanizing goal we can set for ourselves is to create a radically inclusive environment where everyone feels welcome. One of our stated values here is respect for differences. We come together for platforms specifically because we want to learn about others' experiences, both their professional expertise and their personal stories. So compassion capacity building necessarily includes perspective taking, where we try and put ourselves in someone else's shoes. We got a lot of positive feedback after Emil Barrett spoke with us in September, specifically about how it allowed access to a new perspective. His story offered us an intimate glimpse into a life very different from most of ours, and it was profoundly impactful for some of our community members for that reason. So find more opportunities to really understand what other people experience. To be honest, for me, reading fiction is probably a big part of why I know what I know about humans, because if you read a lot of literary fiction, you're constantly inside someone else's perspective. So that's another actionable item, is that if you're someone who sort of struggles with perspective taking, to read more literary fiction, I can give you some recommendations, where you enter someone else's life and you see the world through their eyes. I just thought of that, it wasn't in my notes. But finding more ways to really understand what other people experience and exploring differences is an easy way to build compassion, because once you see why and how someone is how they are, it's hard not to feel for them. Notice I didn't say feel sorry for them, I didn't say feel pity for them, just feel for them. That is what compassion is. Number 9, random and intentional acts of kindness. You can create a ripple effect of well-being in your communities, your broad communities, when you intentionally spread joy and compassion. Big or small, you can have an impact. How often do you take the time to visit the customer service desk in the store just to say, hey, Bob in the deli did a great job? You would be surprised. The fear on the customer service person's desk when you walk up and you're like, I have some feedback. You're like, oh shit, okay. And then I always say, no, it's good, don't worry. And so then I say, whatever I liked, whatever went well, I get the name of the person who did a good job, who made me feel good. Also leaving a positive Yelp review. If you only leave 1-star reviews, first of all, I'm the person who's going to click on all your reviews and see that you only leave 1-star reviews, and I'm going to disregard what you said, because you're only here to complain. So make sure that you take time to give those 5-star reviews when something goes really well. Thank you, Crystal. But I call this being a blessing. Like, my personal goal is to be a blessing to everyone I come across in the world and try to leave everything better than I found it. So, for example, I bought a new car the other day, got my first hybrid. I know, I got rid of an SUV that I loved, but it was not good for the environment. So I have a beautiful, thank you, I have a beautiful Elantra hybrid. But the dealership sucks, right? So I did not want to be there at all, and it was a terrible, so many bad, annoying things happened. It took forever. We had to move locations because they lost electricity, and I was just like, what is happening? But when I came back, it had taken all day, and I was very cranky. But I intentionally approached the general manager of the dealership to say, MJ did a great job selling me that car. He cares a lot about his customers, and I hope he's successful here. And Cole in the finance department was really patient in explaining everything to me. It was not an enjoyable experience, but I didn't tell him that. What I said was all the things that went well. Because I can mine for good things in most situations. And most of the time, the things that didn't go well are not worth dwelling on. Or, how often do you turn to someone in your life and you just say, you know what I love about you? And then you tell them. Do you guys do this? I do it all the time. It's like if you're talking to someone and they do the thing that you like, or you see them, you like the way they think, or you like something, just say, I really like that about you. People are not getting enough of that. Or email or text someone and just say, thank you for everything you do for me. You're a great friend. Or even just, I appreciate you. No one is perfect, but everyone has something about them that you could acknowledge and affirm. Practice saying those things to each other. As my husband would say, give them their flowers while they're still alive to smell them. These may seem small, but they are acts of deep kindness in an often unkind world. They fill people with good feelings that have an outward ripple effect. Positive reinforcement, by the way, works significantly better than criticism, which is demoralizing and demotivating for many people. If you are someone who defaults to criticism, which I understand, I am someone who defaults to criticism. I can tell you everything that's wrong with everything. But I try to keep it to myself or frame it in a positive way, like with the dealership. They didn't need to hear about all the things that they did wrong because most of them they couldn't help. So if you're someone who defaults to criticism, practice instead finding ways to say what you do like and what you want more of, instead of just criticizing what you don't like. Use compassion when offering feedback, remembering that a human person will be receiving it. P.S. We're doing a forum next month about how to give and receive feedback well. You should all come to it. Number 10, set goals. This is also for my head people. This might be particularly appealing for you. If you're not in the habit of engaging in certain ways that highlight compassion, you can set specific goals, such as performing a certain number of acts of kindness each week. Or actively seeking opportunities to help others. Number 11, cultivate gratitude. I see Samantha creeping over here. I'm almost done. But I like how you did that discreetly. But setting intentional goals, it does not devalue the act itself if you need to be reminded to do it, or if you have to set a goal for yourself to do it. The effect is the same. Number 11, cultivate gratitude. I have a daily gratitude practice that I say out loud. Staying in gratitude for the benefits and privileges that I have allows me to stay in compassion for the suffering of others, especially in times like this globally, because I know that it is only by an accident of my birth that I am here and they are there. I thought I wasn't going to cry, but I might on that one. And from where I am, I have nothing to complain about. Number 12, I'm going to get it together. Be patient with each other. Developing compassionate behaviors is a process, and it may take time. Be understanding as we all work to cultivate these skills, especially if you are a heart person and it might come very easily to you. Affirm each other's efforts. I want you to know that I do see your efforts. Please note that there is space for all of us here, heart and head and in-betweeners. We don't have to change who we are or give up the things we love here in order to increase our capacity for compassion. That is what radical inclusion is. It is creating a space where we all belong. I understand that there is a fear among some of you that things will change too much too fast, but this is not an area that should worry you. Working on this will have a net positive impact if we do it well. My heart people are going to love this and find it easy. And for my head people, remember that the practical outcomes of working on compassion together include increased membership and financial security. I thought you'd like that. But most importantly, we will have a shared investment that we can be proud of, when everyone walking through our doors feels loved, cared for, and welcomed. So in closing, let's revisit. I note the obvious differences between each sort and type, but we are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. Thank you. I thought I wouldn't clap.
Thank you, Amy. And I hope you noticed that wasn't an awkward hug. It wasn't. I appreciate that you shared this perspective. I think it's really helpful, and I think it's something that we all should take to heart. So